first voices that we hear in the season of Advent is the voice of Isaiah. Whether you happen to be reading from the Gospels or reading Isaiah's book, you understand that they're self-referencing. Mark looks back to the story and the prophecies found in Isaiah. Matthew, Luke, John do the very same things, looking back to the voice of the prophet, proclaiming a day when God will make all things new. But for now, we're in one of those seasons where it feels like everything is sort of uncertain, everything's sort of teetering on the edge, when things feel a little unstable. I'm feeling like that this morning because I'm adjusting to being off of a cruise ship and back on dry land, and my legs are a little wobbly. So if you see me leaning, just raise a hand. But I have to admit, over the course of the past year or so, perhaps even longer than that, I've had this feeling that we have been teetering on the edge. Things in life have certainly felt unstable and uncertain. You feel it when you read the news, don't you? The instability of things. You see it when you scroll on social media. You see it when you go to bed at night, or perhaps you feel it as you lie in bed with worry sitting just behind your ribs. And every year when Advent rolls around, we feel this pull even more, this tension, this ache, because the world feels so unstable and not a whole lot like the world that God has promised us. We feel the dissonance that exists between the world that we know and the world that God is building among us. Isaiah understood that tension long before we ever named it. In fact, when we meet Isaiah here in chapter 2, he has a vision of God's future. And he proclaims that vision to the people of Judah. A people who are doing okay. Life is good for them. Economically, they're doing all right. Politically, things seem stable because they've got some great alliances with some surrounding nations. The temple's full. And yet, just beneath the surface, there's instability and uncertainty. Political instability, rising military threats from just beyond the desert, and spiritual drift that seems to be taking hold inside of the nation. Their world and our world is troubled, it's divided, it's uncertain, and yet Isaiah does something unexpected. God does something unexpected through Isaiah. Because God's words don't begin with despair or warning or judgment like the next 39 chapters of the book of Isaiah are going to contain. Instead, they begin with vision. A vision of a future that could be. No. It's more than that. It's a vision of a future that will be. Isaiah's words about the vision that God gives him, they begin with this haunting and hopeful phrase, in days to come, or in the later days. Isaiah says, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. What we have here is an invitation from God through the prophet Isaiah, not to escape the reality of our world, but to reimagine our reality. To look not at what is, but at what God will do. And friends, that is the beating heart of Advent. Advent invites us to put into disciplined practice the season of Advent invites us into the disciplined practice of looking past the present and toward the promise of God. I wanted to make sure I said that correctly. Advent invites us into the disciplined practice of looking past the present toward the promise. It's an invitation to choose to trust in God's future, to trust in God's peace, God's wholeness, God's justice, that it's already pressing into our world, even though we can't always see it, even though things feel uncertain and unstable. The image that Isaiah gives us, it begins with a picture almost too big for us to imagine, certainly too big for the people of ancient Israel to imagine. Isaiah sees all nations streaming to the mountain of God, to the temple of God. Not armies marching to conquer, not leaders meeting to negotiate about some kind of peace or justice, but people drawn to God, drawn by longing, drawn by hope, drawn by grace to the mountain of God. This, friends, is a vision of hope. And it's a reversal of the world's story. It's a reversal of the world's reality. We're used to a world built on rivalry, winners and losers, strong and weak, us and them. You know this because you just lived through rivalry weekend, some of you. Some of you were wearing crimson yesterday, or maybe navy blue and orange. No football fans here? All right, okay, all right. We did our rivalry weekend earlier in the season for Georgia Southern and App State, right? So maybe you were an all-Alabama team yesterday, family yesterday, and you didn't call your friend who was an Auburn fan. Or maybe you Georgia fans. No, I see fingers pointing now. You Georgia fans didn't talk to your family members who happened to go to that school on the north side of Atlanta. We know all about rivalry. We know all about division. We know about all sorts of ways that we separate ourselves one from another. But God's future, it's not built on competition or division, but instead on communion. On all God's people coming together to journey to the mountain of God. Not in war, not to fight it out, but in peace. Isaiah says that in the last days that it's God's peace that will reign. Swords will become useless, weapons become unnecessary, war training becomes obsolete. Doesn't that sound impossible? When we hear about nations beginning nuclear testing once again. When we hear about the new and next threat every single day on the news. Let's be honest, it's hard in a world that looks like ours to envision the kind of future that God desires to establish for us. In fact, Isaiah's vision sounds impossible. Walter Brueggemann says this. He was a professor at Columbia where I did my doctoral studies. He says, it's tempting for us in an era of military conflict, nationalism, and international mistrust simply to write off such an announcement as this one as either unrealistic or as applying to an era only beyond history and not within it. Brueggemann says it's easy to think that what Isaiah is speaking of is just wishful thinking and a hopeful, kind of heartwarming sense of things. But this text, Brueggemann says, like so much of the Bible, confronts our resignation with the assurance that God will one day reign and reign in peace. Isaiah's promise of in the last days marries hope to our fears. And isn't that the truth? God doesn't dismiss our fears. He marries them to hope. He doesn't allow us to give in to despair. Instead, he says, I will build hope in the midst of your despair. A few weeks ago at Open Table, I was walking out, generally hurriedly over to my Bible study that we're doing on Surprised by Hope. As I walked out, one of the gentlemen that was in the lobby said to me, Pastor, and anytime someone says pastor to me, I'll pause, I'll stop, because you don't really know me very well, please call me Jonathan. He said, Pastor? I said, yes, sir. And he said, every Wednesday when I walk in here, my world feels heavy. But every time I walk in here, I feel a little lighter. Friends, I can tell you that he wasn't talking about the food, because we always have plenty of food and nobody leaves Open Table lighter. He's talking about hope. at a table full of strangers, this gentleman caught a glimpse of God's mountain rising in the world. He caught a glimpse of the kingdom that God is building among us. And if we look closely, we can catch glimpses of God's future happening right among us. When neighbors choose compassion over conflict, when volunteers serve instead of sitting back, when a child bows her head to pray, when a community rises after a disaster and says, we will rebuild. We will not abandon our friends, our family, and our community. Friends, these are small foretastes of God's future breaking in to our present reality. Advent begins with a vision, not blind optimism, but holy imagination rooted in God's character. Because our God is a God of love. Our God is a God of justice. Our God is a God of mercy and of grace. Our God is a God who desires for the unity of all nations. Our God is a God who desires for us to be free and to be whole and to be well. Holy imagination rooted in God's character. Isaiah tells us in his vision that the people are climbing, the nations are climbing the mountain of God for one reason: to learn God's ways and to walk in God's paths. They aren't seeking or just seeking a better world. They're seeking a better way to live. They're not just looking towards some sort of manufactured peace. They're looking for true peace, true hope, true righteousness, which comes with a new way of living. Because, friends, faith is not simply believing in the promises of God. Faith is learning the way of life those promises make possible. I want to say that again so you don't miss it. Faith is not simply believing God's promises. It's learning the way of life those promises make possible. And there's some detraining that happens. Because our world has been training us from the very first breath we took to live in fear. Fear of not having enough, fear of losing control, fear of those who aren't like us, fear of the future, fear of change. But God trains us in something completely different. God trains us for love, because perfect love casts out all fear. It undoes our anxieties. Perfect love is the root of hope. And God's ways are different than the world's ways. God teaches us patience instead of panic, sacrifice instead of selfishness, peacemaking instead of proving that we are right, especially on social media. God teaches us hospitality instead of hostility. God's ways are different than our world's ways. And so during the season of Advent, God invites us to walk in a different sort of rhythm, to take steps in a different direction than perhaps we've been traveling up to this point in our lives, to trust that His way leads to life that truly is life. This is why Jesus matters. This is why His birth matters, and we will celebrate after this season of preparation, because Jesus is God's way made flesh. Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the light. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus is not just God in the flesh. He's God's way made flesh. And to walk with Him is to discover what it means to be your fullest self, to be truly human, to be the person that God has crafted you and created you uniquely to be before the very foundations of the earth. But we only discover who we actually are as we walk along that way. You see, friends, the heart of Isaiah's vision, one of the most famous lines in all of Scripture, is this: that they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Weapons become tools for cultivation. Tools of death become instruments of life. And this isn't just about wars that are out there, but instead this is about wars that are going on in here, inside of our human hearts. Resentment, bitterness, cynicism, the desire to wound others with our words, the instinct to protect ourselves at all costs. All of these weapons will be redeemed if we learn to walk along the way and to walk in the light of the Lord. Because God's peace, friends, it's not passive. It's the active transformation of our hearts and of our world. Some might say that's not possible, but I'll give you an illustration of just how possible it is. Years ago, I watched a video of a man in Rwanda who had participated in the Rwandan genocide. Years after the brutal conflict there, when the gospel had taken hold of his life, he goes back to the family of those that he had slain. And he asks for forgiveness from the families of the men that he had killed. And do you know what he does now? He's a farmer. He put down his gun and he literally took up a plow. He grows food on the very same plot of ground where blood was once shed. The world says people don't change. God says, watch what I can do. I'm building a mountain, a temple right here and right now. Christmas isn't just about a baby born in a manger. It's about God entering our world to change the world. And the world will tell you that that's not possible. But once again, God says, just watch. So Isaiah ends with this very simple invitation for you and for me. Verse 5 says, O house of Jacob, come. Let us walk in the light of the Lord. Don't just admire the vision that God has given us through his prophet Isaiah. Don't just wait for God to do something later. Don't treat hope as some sort of future luxury that's reserved for us when we float off into the great beyond. Start living, Isaiah says, as if God's future is already drawing near, as if that day is already dawning. The world says walk in fear. Jesus says walk in the light. The world says hold on to your anger. Jesus says forgiveness is essential. So forgive as I have forgiven you. The world says protect all of your resources. Jesus says give to the least of these. The world says people don't change. Jesus says watch what my grace can do. Advent, it invites us to walk toward the one who is already walking towards us, Jesus Christ. We celebrate and we prepare for Emmanuel, who is God with us. One of the most fascinating things about the life of John Wesley are his very last words, and he wanted to be very intentional about these being his very last words. And so he repeated them again and again and again, simply saying, the best of all is God is with us. The best of all is God is with us. Not that God will be with us, but that God is with us. That's not wishful thinking, friends. That's not sort of a seasonal sentiment that goes away with the holidays. That's not a Hallmark card. It's the heartbeat of Advent. Hope is knowing that God is with us right here and right now, at work in ways that we sometimes can see but many times cannot see, moving history toward his peace, transforming lives with his love, and calling us to walk in his light. So as we begin this season, Isaiah invites us to lift our eyes, because in days to come, the world will look like the mountain of God. In days to come, justice will roll down like mighty rivers. In days to come, peace will embrace every heart. In days to come, Christ will come again. In days to come. But here and now, best of all, God is with us. So you don't have to wait for the mountain of God to tower over all the other mountains, because the mountain of God is being built in your heart. You're invited to come and walk in the light of the Lord. You don't have to wait for some day, because today is the day when God's kingdom is breaking into the earth. When God's kingdom breaks into our hearts, God's kingdom breaks into the world. So today, my hope and my prayer for you is that you would hear Isaiah's vision of the future that God is building, and that you would come and walk in the light of the Lord, because God is with us.